Hello, thank you for watching my channel today. My name is Sarah and my channel is called Your True Shelf. This is take 2 for me because I spent nearly an hour recording a video about my August and September wrap-ups, and then after 4 seconds there was this horrible screeching noise over the top of my microphone, and therefore it was completely unusable. So I've decided just to scrap it. I'm not doing it again. I just can't face talking about all the same books again. So instead, I'm making a video which I've wanted to make for a long time, which is when doctors become authors. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm a doctor, I'm a GP in England, and I have always been interested in when doctors write books. And I'm not talking about textbooks, I'm not talking about medical factual books, I'm talking about fiction or memoir. And this is obviously of particular interest for me because of my job, but I thought I would share some of my top books that I've got either on my TBR or that I've read already. And there is a whole genre out of there called medical fiction. So these are books which aren't necessarily written by doctors, but they might contain medical themes. So for instance, Me Before You by Jojo Moyes, or The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, or I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. Both of the last two are non-fiction, but there's a whole group of books which are about medical things but not by doctors. So if you'd like a separate video about that, then let me know and I'll be very happy to do that. But we've got some fiction, some non-fiction here, and I'm looking forward to digging in and letting you know about the books. So the first one, I'm going to start with a fiction book, and this is one of my favourite books of all time. This author has 3 books, 2 of which I have read and I adore all of them so far. And this is Khaled Hosseini, who, this is A Thousand Splendid Suns. This is one of my favourite books of all time, like I just said. I've read this book, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 times now, but I love it every time and I will reread it again just because it's wonderful. So in this book, this is set in Afghanistan and it starts before the war, and it's following Mariam, who is a young girl when the book starts, and she has to marry a man called Rashid. Yeah. Who is much older than her and is a really horrible man. And it follows Mariam's life with Rashid, and then also we follow later in the book a young girl called Lola, who becomes Rashid's second wife. And it's not only about how that changes the dynamics, but it's about Mariam and Lola's friendship as things develop between them. And I don't really want to say more than that, but this book is not only set in an incredible setting and touches heavily on what it's like to live in a country which becomes so transformed, but also the relationships between wives and domestic abuse, and just the love of a mother for her children. And this book is just absolutely beautiful. It really reaches you. You love the characters so much, and once read, never forgotten. This book, I just absolutely love it. And so Khaled Hosseini is the first author on my list. The second book is a medical memoir, which is written by an emergency doctor, so A&E in this country, or ER doctor in America, and that is The Beauty in Breaking by Dr. Michele Harper. So Michele Harper is a Black American physician who is used to working in an overwhelmingly male and white environment, and this is about her realization of how we can all be broken in different ways, and through the stories that she tells with her patients, she writes about what she's learnt from her patients about recuperation and recovery and the beauty in breaking so that we can mend ourselves. So yeah, so it says, the last bit of the blurb says that Harper passes along the precious wisdom she has learned as a daughter, a woman and a physician. So I really love this cover. I love orange and purple together, but I'm also really looking forward to reading a book about what it's like to be a black woman who's a doctor, as well as the lessons that she has learned. Moving on to more medical memoir, the next books come as a set. So that we have A Fortunate Man, which is by John Berger, and we have A Fortunate Woman, which is by Polly Morland. So this book is a memoir of a country GP who was practicing in the 1960s, and it was his thoughts on recognising his patients' humanity when illness and the fear of death have made them unrecognisable to themselves. And it's quite a poor rural community that he works in, and it's his memoirs of that life. And then the other book, A Fortunate Women, was written much more recently. The lady who wrote this book is also a GP, and she found a book down the back of her mum's bookcase, which was this one, and when she started flicking through it, she recognised the photos in the book as the place where she works, and she actually works at the same place that this doctor worked at, but much later. And so this is, I'm just going to move it over here. It says how his book and his work influenced her work and her life in the modern times. And it also says, working with the community she loves, she is a rarity in contemporary medicine, a modern doctor who knows her patients inside and out, the lives of this ancient wild place entwined with her own. So this book is half a century later, but in the same place. And I really want to read both of these. I've also heard her interviewed on a podcast called Bedside Reading, which is by a doctor called Tara George. It's a really good podcast that I'll link below, and Polly Morland speaks on that about this book, which is how I knew about both books together. Back to fiction, and we go to another general physician who was also an infectious disease doctor, and this is Abraham Verghese. So I have read and loved this book. I would also give this like 5 stars plus. This is an amazing book. I've bought his newest book, A Covenant of Water, but I haven't yet read it. I've got it on Kindle and Audible, but I haven't started it yet. It's a real chunkster. This book is so good. It's set in Ethiopia. It follows a nun who's had a relationship with a surgeon called Mr. Stone, who is British, and at the very start of the book, it's her very traumatic labour giving birth to twins, Marion and Shiva. And Marion and Shiva are born in the 1950s in a mission hospital, and they have very different personalities, and their lives go in 2 different ways. I can't remember which of the twins it is, but one of them becomes very involved in developing surgery to help women who have fistulas. So when there have been very long and difficult childbirths, a fistula is when there's a joining between 2 things which aren't supposed to be joined. So for instance, the bladder and the uterus, or the uterus and the bowel, and then that can lead to continence problems, infection. Women could be ostracised from the villages where they live in because they don't have control of their bladder or bowels, and they are pivotal in discovering surgical techniques to try and help these women. So there is a strong medical theme in the book, but if that doesn't sound like your cup of tea, it doesn't matter, because this book is a story of a family living in difficult circumstances in a war-torn country, and it spans a lot of years, and these characters become our friends and we love them, and that's the best kind of book in my opinion. So yes, this is absolutely wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to reading The Covenant of Water. Back to more memoir. Sorry if you can hear my husband just put the Hoover on downstairs. Sorry if you can hear that in the background. This is a book that I read a while ago now, several years ago. I think maybe even when I was still a medical student. And this is direct read by Gabriel Weston. So Gabriel Weston is an ear, nose and throat surgeon in the UK, living in London. And this is her memoir of what it's like not only to be an ENT surgeon, but to be a female surgeon in a world which is male dominated. So there's still a lot more male surgeons than female surgeons, and she is treated differently and treated in an unacceptable way as being a woman. And it's very interesting. It's a very slim book, but it's very interesting to hear about her work as a female surgeon, as well as what it's like to just deal with the kind of things that she deals with on a day-to-day basis in her working life. Next, I have a memoir which I haven't yet read, and I'm not quite sure what made me want to pick this up in the first place, but I did pick it up, and it's The Prison Doctor by Amanda Brown. So Amanda Brown is a GP who works in prisons as part of her job, and it says that she treats inmates in the UK's most infamous prisons, from miraculous pregnancies to dirty protests, and from violent attacks on prisoners to heartbreaking acts of self-harm. She's witnessed it all from her patients. So I had to work in, or had to visit a secure unit as part of one of my GP jobs, and I won't lie, I found it a pretty scary experience. I found it quite intimidating, and it was an experience that I didn't like. And so I feel like it would be interesting to see it from a different perspective, because I know some people love working in the prison system and it wasn't for me, but I would be interested to hear about her experiences doing a job that she really loves. Moving back to fiction, we have a book from Shirlene Obuobi, who has written On Rotation. She is a cardiologist in America, and I believe she has Ghanaian heritage. She has written a book about a doctor who is very much the pride of her parents. She's got the kind of boyfriend that her parents approve of. She's doing a prestigious career. She's got a good group of friends, and all of a sudden everything starts going wrong. She fails an exam, her boyfriend breaks up with her, her friends are getting more distant from her, and things are just not going very well. And then she meets a guy who's a fellow doctor who sees her more for who she is rather than who she is supposed to be, and she likes him, but he's not the kind of guy that she knows she should be dating. And so this is a doctor or medical romance, which I'm really looking forward to, because I'm not sure, apart from obviously like the TV series that have a lot of medical romance in them, I'm not sure that I've ever read a medical romance. So I'm looking forward to reading this one. This should be good fun. A memoir which will break your heart is called When Breath Becomes Air by Dr. Paul Kalanithi. He was a neurosurgeon who developed lung cancer and very sadly died when he was in his late 30s. And this book is his memoirs of what it was like to be diagnosed with lung cancer and be palliative. And his wife had to finish the book because he died before he could finish it. And I remember reading this with tears rolling down my face. It was very, very sad, but also very beautiful. He was a very talented writer. And this book and another book that I'm going to talk about, I lent out to colleagues at work and never got back, which is why I don't lend out books. So yeah, so I don't have a physical copy of it anymore, but it was a book that I found very moving and would recommend if you're up for a book which deals with palliative care, but also how that fits with the rest of life and is very heartbreaking. So go in warned that you will cry reading this book. The next book I'm going to talk about is one called The Antidote for Everything by Kimmery Martin, who is an emergency doctor. This book was really good. I read this a couple of years ago. We're following two doctors whose names I should have looked up before I started filming this and didn't. We have a male doctor and a female doctor who are really good friends, and they're working together in a hospital. And all of a sudden, the owners of the hospital, because in America, the hospitals are privately owned. I don't know if all hospitals, but certainly many hospitals. And so because they're privately owned, the people who own them are able to make the rules. And this hospital is either owned by the church, or the church pay a lot of the money for this hospital, and they've decided that they are no longer going to treat any transgender patients at their hospital. And so the two doctors who are our main characters in this book will find this absolutely disgusting, and they basically want to fight the system that makes this rule, but they're being increasingly threatened that their careers will be basically ended, and they will be sacked if they fight the governing body of the hospital, which doesn't want to treat transgender patients. And I think they're trying to extend it past transgender patients to all queer patients as well. So this talks a lot about the ethics of medicine, but it's also a really good story. There's some romance in there. There's ethics, like I said. There's blackmail. There's some trauma in there. It's a really, really good book which covers a really important issue. I believe Kimmery Martin's written 2 other books. I haven't read either of them, but I would really be interested in reading more of what she writes. A book which I read, I think last year, perhaps the year before, was called Proof of Heaven by Dr. Eben Alexander. He is a neurosurgeon who became incredibly unwell very quickly with a type of sepsis which affected his brain, and he was in a coma. for a long time, and it was very touch and go whether he was going to survive or not. And he talks about his near-death experience that he had whilst he was in a coma, and he went from thinking that he often had patients who talked about near-death experiences which he always dismissed, and he always felt they were as a result of the medication that patients were given, or as a result of the infection they had, or false memories, and he always dismissed what they said as just, oh, that's nice, and didn't really think anything of it until it happened to him. And he has now started a research foundation about near-death experiences, but he talks in great depth about what happened to him. He also wrote down all of his experiences before he did any research, because he didn't want to change any of his memories by looking things up and changing how he reported anything. And he also put forward all of the common theories about why near-death experiences happen, and basically theorised on how they can't be dismissed in any of the ways that he used to dismiss them scientifically, if that makes sense. So he trusts now that people do have near-death experiences, and they do go to wherever we go after we die and have experiences there. And it was really fascinating and beautiful to read about it, and it's changed his whole outlook and practice, and everything has changed for him as a result of the experience that happened to him. So if that's something of interest to you, then I'd really recommend that book. If you are into crime, then Tess Gerritsen is another author who used to be a physician. She's retired as a doctor now, but she has written the Rizzoli and Isles series. I read the first two. I think they were like a little bit too gory for me. They are quite quite bloody and scary. I think too much for me, but they were also adapted into a TV series, and so she is another author that I would recommend if you are into that kind of book, which I'm not really, but she deserves a shout out. Joanna Cannon is another author who is a doctor. So she was a psychiatry trainee and she left medicine, but she wrote fiction and non-fiction. So she wrote the Breaking and Mending, which was her memoir about her time as a doctor and how she found it really difficult and why she left medicine. But she's also written fiction, so I believe she only has 2 books out. One is The Trouble with Goats and Sheep, which is a sort of cozy crime neighbourhood sort of mystery which is trying to be solved by 2 local children. And also 3 Things About Elsie, which is about a woman who has dementia and lives in a care home. And so I think she has another book which is either out now or coming out soon. And so she is another successful author who's written general fiction. And the final book that I want to mention is another one which I lent out and shouldn't have done. But this is It's All in Your Head by Suzanne O'Sullivan. I did do a standalone review of this when I very first started BookTube, so don't go and watch it because it's probably terrible. Because I'd only just started BookTube, my camera wasn't very good, I didn't have a microphone. I guess, yeah, so I'm not going to link it down below because I don't know how embarrassing it is, but this is a really, really interesting book about functional medical illnesses. So basically, her focus, she's a neurologist, and it's about neurological illnesses where we can't find an underlying medical cause, but they're still real illnesses. They're not fabricated illnesses where people are making them up. They're real illnesses which we just don't know why they're happening. So things like non-epileptic seizures, for instance, are a focus in the book, or what we call like functional blindness, where people can't see but there's nothing wrong with their eyes, or just different things that happen to people, often due to something traumatic happening to them, and it then presenting in a physical way. And the most annoying thing about this whole book, well, the only annoying thing really about the book, is that the whole premise of the book is to explain that it's not all in your head, and it's not a fabrication, but it's a real illness which we need to learn more about, understand how best to help people. Yet the title's called It's All in Your Head, which is really stupid because it contradicts the whole book. So anyway, I don't feel like I can really ever recommend it to patients because I don't really want to tell them to read a book called It's All in Your Head. That just feels very dismissive and rude. So anyhow, that was that was the last book that I wanted to mention, but if you're interested in functional illness or you're interested in neurology, then it's really fascinating. It's done in case studies about things that have happened to different people, and I don't believe that you would need to be medical in order to read the book, but I think it's really interesting. So that was a range of books written, fiction and non-fiction, by doctors. And as I said, if you'd like me to do a video about books which feature medical things in fiction or non-fiction which aren't written by doctors, then let me know and I'll very happily make that video for you. I hope that you're having a lovely week. I really hope when I turn the camera off this is usable. And I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.